What a celebration it is to finally be at this moment. Thank you for hosting us this evening, and I'm just so full of joy and pride about how far we've come in this journey to all be here together on this campus, and what a beautiful way tonight for us all to join together to study and to think about what we have to learn from each other in terms of our faith. So thank you all for being here. In terms of that, I invite you to remember that next time you come to a Center for Faith Studies event, or perhaps a Tri-Faith event, bring a friend, right? Because we deserve to have more people in the room tonight than are in this room tonight. And I want each of you to realize that this thing we're trying to do to know our neighbors counts on you being the thing that makes that happen. So hold yourself accountable, please, because we have to do this thing together. So the next thing you could show up at, and if you don't have plans, then you need to do this when you go home tonight, is dinner in Abraham's tent. So on April 28th, we are all going to gather at the CHI Health Center. Wajat Ali will speak to us about current events and help us laugh and enjoy each other and hear his story. He has a very compelling story. I heard him speak in July at Reimagine Interfaith about his journey as a Muslim in North America and how it has affected his journey to be a peacemaker and to cross lines of faith. And I think you'll find his message moving. It's also our major fundraiser, and we can't make this stuff happen without money. So we need you to come and support us on April 28th. And then on May 19th is your day to come to the campus for the open house of all of our faith institutions, the dedication of our community garden and our orchard, and that is a huge celebration. It will be an opportunity to tour all three of the faith buildings, and so if you haven't had a chance to see all of this building or the synagogue or the mosque, May 19th, Sunday, starting at 12:30 here, is the day to do that. Again, this thing is about bringing a friend, right? Drag them here if you have to, right? Whatever it takes. If you're not following us on Facebook, getting our newsletter for Tri-Faith, drag me out anywhere. Go on our website, check us out on Facebook. Make sure you're getting the message, and encourage your friends to do that too. Again, welcome for being here, and I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. And who's next?
Hi, welcome to our new place. Isn't it beautiful? Yes, I know. This is so terrific. I'm Chris Alexander. I am the associate pastor here at Countryside Community Church and the director of Center for Faith Studies. And I'm very grateful that you're all here and to welcome you all to our new space. There should be plenty of time for you to kind of mill about a little bit later on if you haven't already had a chance to do that. And just look around. Every time I turn around, there's something new coming in. I left to go pick up our speaker yesterday afternoon, and I came back and there was furniture in the hallway. I left this afternoon to pick him up to take him to the Malcolm X Museum, and there were chairs in our chapel when I came back. So every time I turn around, something new is there. So please come back again and again and mill about all you want to so that you can help us celebrate this beautiful place that we now call home. This is the last event of our Center for Faith Studies series for this year. We begin again in July with some events that we are partnering together with First United Methodist, and we will have a whole lineup of amazing people that are coming in for the next year of the next program year of speakers, and some of those are highlighted in your bulletin, so I hope you will take a look at those and save those dates because those are out. Wonderful speakers that we were really looking forward to sharing with you. And as Wendy said, please bring a friend. That would be terrific. Now, it is my pleasure to be able to introduce our speaker tonight. His name is Dr. Omid Safi. He is an American professor of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Duke University. And there at Duke University, he actually directs the Islamic Studies Center that is there. He's been in interfaith work for over 30 years. Where I first came across his work He is a regular columnist for the On Being podcast with Krista Tippett. Are you all aware of that? So you probably recognize his name from that. And he's a good friend of Mike Morell's, who introduced us and brought us together so that he could be with us tonight. And I've spent the last 24 hours, a little bit more, in the afternoons, together with him, getting to know him a little bit better, and it is amazing how he brings his expertise to a brand new place called the Tri-Faith Initiative, and yet everything he speaks is exactly true to what I've experienced in the last 5 years of working with the Tri-Faith Initiative. And so we have so much just heart to heart where we can consult with him in the work that he's done in order to be better at what we do right here. And the start of that, of course, is love. And he's written several books, all of which are fabulous. But this latest book called Radical Love, I have been reading, and it is so moving, and it is so full of yearning that brings us to a much better place, that as we recognize the Creator's love for us, we are able then to turn around and love one another in an energy and an experience that brings us to our most fullest potential as human beings and as neighbors to one another. So I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Omid Safi as our Center for Faith Studies speaker tonight.
All right. Ooh. Didn't realize I was as loud as I am. Maybe it's true what they say. All right, friends, hello and welcome. I am so touched and honored that you all have taken time out of your life and your schedule for us to be here together this evening. I have a very simple and heartfelt way that I try to begin every occasion to be with friends in a public setting, which is that I ask that we honor this time that we have together. The number of breaths that we get to take in our life is finite, and it's measured. And that realization is something that leads me to an ethical and indeed a spiritual commitment, that the time that we choose to spend together be something that brings us closer, makes us kinder, gentler, and more deeply aware of how beautifully interwoven our lives are. This is a difficult time for us as a country. I don't think I need to remind you of all the different ways in which we're really struggling right now to live as a people, as a shared people. I don't remember another time in our history where it felt so challenging to try to have a real, honest conversation across ideological lines. It seemed like more and more of us are finding comfort in the bubbles that we each live in, whether those bubbles are on the right or on the left. And we are avoiding those conversations that rub us, that challenge us, that push us. And as a result, I think a lot of us are living in a general sense of dread, of fear for what has happened to the beloved America, the beloved world, or to put it in the context of a faith community, to that beloved community that we all want to live in. Well, you can't have the beloved community without love. So I could have asked to be allowed to speak with you about any range of topics. Some of them may be very political and contemporary and edgy, but I asked to see if the topic for this evening could be love. And to have that love come out of the heart of the Islamic tradition. Right? This is the jewels. These are the luminous teachings of my faith tradition. These are the most precious gifts that I think we have to share with humanity. I don't think I need to pause and remind you that going based on the coverage that Islam and Muslims tend to receive in popular media, let's say that the word love, the teachings of love, perhaps are not at the forefront of associations that we always and often have with the Islamic tradition. And as a result, what I find is that many Muslims, particularly those of us who are committed to being in interfaith dialogue with our neighbors, with our friends, end up having to define ourselves and define our lives always in a negative. That we are not radical, that we are not terrorists, that we're not extremists, that we're not dangerous, that we're not anti-American, that we're not patriarchal, that we're not misogynistic, that we're not anti-Semitic. And not only is that exhausting, I also don't know of anyone in the history of humanity who has come closer to God by defining themselves as what they are not. At some point, we open our eyes in the morning, and there has to be a faith, there has to be a hope, there has to be a love that moves you, that inspires you to be just a little bit better than you were the breath before. And these love teachings, I find, are really at the heart of all of our faith traditions. I was speaking with the dear friends that I've made since yesterday of the great fortune of both being Muslim and teaching courses about Islam, but I also teach courses on comparative mysticism. I teach courses on the shared ethical and spiritual teachings of our Jewish sisters and brothers, perhaps best exemplified through luminous sages like Rabbi Heschel. And I have a deep personal commitment to the prophetic tradition of the Bible, the one that starts with Amos and Jeremiah, moves through John the Baptist and Jesus of Nazareth, for me moves also through the Muhammad of Arabia, and that's the one of Matthew 25 that connects together the love of God to the love of humanity, starting with the least of these, that which we do to those who are most vulnerable at the moment, we do unto him. And the more I look at the heart of the Jewish tradition, the heart of the Muslim tradition, and the heart of the Christian tradition, I find that there is this powerful teaching of love that mingles. It is a river that moves through a lot of different landscapes, and we might change the name that we give to the river, but if you've been in the river, you know what it feels like. And so the teachings that I want to share have to do with this tradition of love. I don't want us to lose sight of where we are at the present moment. These same Muslim sages have a powerful teaching. This is the first of the gifts that I would like to share with you. I think these are the kinds of teachings that anyone of any faith background can practice. And I think if you're a Christian, it makes you a better Christian. If you're a Jew, it makes you a better Jew. And if you're a Muslim, it makes you a more loving Muslim. And the teaching simply goes like this: have your heart be where your feet are. Have your heart be where your feet are. Now, at face value, that seems like a very obvious statement. What are you talking about? I'm, of course, right here. My heart's right here. My feet are right here. Ta-da! Right? I don't know what your experience in life these days is like. Maybe some of you live in a blissful state of cosmic existence called retirement, in which you are free from all pain, you are free from all suffering. When I ask most of my coworkers, how are you doing? The answer that I get back usually is this: I'm just so busy. I'm so busy. And they look up helplessly as if the answers are written on the wall somewhere. I just have so much to do, right? And I'm reminded that in Muslim tradition, when we want to ask each other, how are you? Right? Whether you're speaking Arabic or Persian or Turkish or Urdu or a number of other languages, what we actually ask each other is hal shama, kayfa halakum, abka hal, which means, how is the passing state of your heart? Right? That's what it means to ask each other, how are you? How is your heart doing in this very breath, my friend? Right? I'm not asking how many items do you have in your inbox. I'm not asking how long is your checklist. This is not a competition, and none of us win that game. We're all losing. We're all stressed out. Half of my friends are doing yoga. Yoga is great, but you shouldn't have to do yoga in order to survive this great blessing called life. Yoga is pain reduction, stress management in a world that is still completely out of whack. So what do these sages remind us? Have your heart be where your feet are. Most of us live somewhere between a past and a future that we're perpetually projecting ourselves towards. We think about some trauma that happened to us in the past, individually or communally. Why didn't mommy love me? Why didn't daddy express his care to me? Why were we as a people so hurt? Or we project ourselves towards the future. I hope things will be okay. I hope I will get that job. I hope I will find Mr. Right, Mrs. Right, number 1, number 2, number 3, bingo! I teach 18 to 22-year-olds, and I always have to keep reminding them, Jesus didn't know that he was the Christ until he was 30. Siddhartha didn't know that he was the Buddha until he was 35. Muhammad didn't know that he was God's prophet until he was 40. Honey, you're pretty cool. You ain't cooler than any of them, right? There's nothing that says at 22 you have to figure out who you are, what you're going to do, who you're going to marry, and your vocation and calling in life. Like, be a little patient with yourself. How is your heart doing in this very moment? And that's the thing about love. Love brings you to the here and now. If I want to love you, I have to be with you. I have to tend to you. I have to look at you eye to eye and heart to heart. Have my arm gently touching your arm. How is your heart doing in this very breath, my dear? And then whatever answer you give actually tells me something about the state of your heart. Just telling me that I'm so busy, got so many meetings, I learned nothing. So that love brings us to the here and now. And as it does with our human-to-human interaction, what if we have the same awareness in terms of our relationship to the divine? It is easy enough for us to project ourselves back into a cosmic past, a fall, an exile, a forgetting. Right? These are all Muslim, Jewish, Christian key concepts. Or perhaps hurl ourselves into some future cosmic accountability. Heaven, hell, judgment, salvation, redemption. What if we follow the teachings of sages who say, I am with my beloved Lord, here and now. There's one of the great sages that we're going to be talking about tonight from around the year 1000. And in his day and age, people loved to have visionary experiences of the throne of God. This was the most awesome thing that they could imagine. And so one of these saintly ones comes to him and says, "Come with me, let us go and dream of God's throne." And he puts his foot on the ground and says, "Breathe with me. Here and now, this here is God's throne." What about a path of love that calls us to be with the divine beloved in this breath? I don't want to wait for heaven. I don't want to wait for some hereafter. Before I can get to the hereafter, I want to be here. And this is luminous. This is beautiful. This is filled with sanctity. So we're going to start, maybe, by telling you a story. This story is from a book called The Remembrance of the Friends of God. The Remembrance of the Friends of God. And it's a book that was written in the year around 1200. That's the shrine of the particular saintly friend. If I call them saints, that's what I'm talking about. Luminous beings, right? He tells the story of an African saint, an Egyptian saint named Zulnun the Egyptian, Zulnun Mesri. And he has a dream of the Day of Judgment. He says, all the human beings who have ever been, all the human beings who are, and all the ones who shall forever be are collected in front of God. And they hear the voice of God coming to them in waves. The first comment from God is, "You've been told that there might be a reckoning, there might be a judgment, there might be an accountability, but tonight there is none. No judgment, no reckoning, no weighing of your good deeds and bad deeds. Who among you wishes to attain to the sum total of all the worldly delights and pleasures?" All right, be honest. Show of hands. Sum total: chocolate cake, tantric sex, cuddling by the fire, your mama's cooking, it all in there. And the people are like, no test, no judgment, no accountability? None. So, show of hands, be honest. and they hear the voice of God come to them, it is granted unto you. You may leave. So they're like, seriously? They're like, seriously? So they get up and they leave, and they're actually given the sum total of all the worldly pleasures. Smaller group of people left. Who here wishes to be freed from all pain? No pain, no suffering, no torment, no hellfire. And they're like, wow. No getting old, no sickness, no disease, no my knees, your back, my hip, your arm. No pain, no suffering, no torment, no hellfire. Show of hands. Right? If you're over 50, you're like, oh, that hand's going up real fast, Second time, it is granted unto you. And they leave. Smaller group of people. Who among you, third time to hear the voice of God, wishes to be admitted to my loftiest paradise, a garden so filled with light that no eye has ever seen it and no words have ever described it? So of the ones who are left, about 90% of them put up their hand. A lofty garden, luminous, filled with light, no words ever. That sounds pretty good. And they leave. There is no catch. And then you got a small crowd, and that's why we never apologize for small crowds, because these stories love the small crowds. And there's a handful of people left, and it says that the fourth time around, the voice of God comes to them thundering. I offered you the sum total of all the worldly pleasures. You took it not. I gave you the chance to be free from every pain, every torment, every suffering. You took it not. I even offered you my loftiest and most luminous paradise. You chose it not. What have you come here for? And this Egyptian African saint says, the few people who were left, they lowered their heads in humility and they said, we did not come for pleasure. We did not come to be spared suffering and hellfire. We didn't even come for heaven and the garden. We came for you. And Zulnun says, then a fourth and final time, they hear the voice of God in the most gentle way, saying, in that case, I am yours. I am yours. Now, this story is 1,000 years old, right? This wasn't made up in some New Agey, San Francisco, Bay Area, West Coasty, progressive. This is the heart of the Islamic tradition, talking about how there have always been those who are in it for the heart of God. They seek the beloved more than they seek heaven and salvation or pleasure. This path of radical love are the people that we want to be talking about this evening. And then to end by asking the question, what do they have to say to us today in this age of suffering? I want to remind us that there have always been women and men on this path. Many of the stories of these women have been erased through history, so we got to go back and recover them. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging to do. Here's a woman named Rabia who was born as a Christian slave who is freed. She becomes Muslim and she becomes one of these saintly women. Iconically, she's always remembered as carrying these opposites: a lit torch in one hand and a vase or a bucket of water in the other, and she's running through town in the middle of the day. And people say, "What are you doing, Rabia?" And she says, "I'm going to find heaven, and I'm going to burn it down with this lit torch. I'm going to find me hell, and I'm going to quench it down with this bucket of water so that people have no reason left to worship God other than God." So this is her famous prayer, which has been preserved for about the last 1,200 years. "O Lord, if I worship you for fear of hell, burn me in that hell. If I worship you hoping for paradise, make it forbidden for me. But if I worship you only for your own sake, do not withhold from me your everlasting beauty. Do not withhold from me your everlasting beauty." Rabia also had a wicked sense of humor, as many of these rambunctious women do and did. There's a wonderful story about her that's also in this book. By the way, you don't need to write down this stuff, it's all in the book. Where she's walking by a temple, a church, a mosque, we're not exactly told, but a holy site. And there's a man sitting on the pulpit preaching. And what he's saying is a saying that is familiar to many of you: "Knock, and it shall be opened unto you." And Rabia is just walking, she hears this, and she just stops. And she pokes her head through the door, and the male preacher sitting on the pulpit is really offended at this woman interrupting his eloquent sermon. And so he wants to put her in her place. And so he's like, "I said, knock, and it shall be opened unto you." And Rabia is just unfazed. She walks in a couple of steps, and she's like, "What did you say?" And the preacher is now really offended. She's like, "I said, knock, and it shall be opened unto you." And she says, "My friend, you are already on the inside. The door that you keep knocking at, you're knocking from the inside of the house." We are already in the divine presence. We keep knocking and knocking. When is God going to open the door? One of these great saints says, we are the fish in the ocean, and the fish have no word for the ocean. The ocean is invisible as Allah is invisible to us. We couldn't even exist were it not for God. The Prophet of Islam, Muhammad, uses the most beautiful maternal image. So in the Islamic tradition, we generally avoid the language of either God the Father or God the Mother, right? We think gender is something of this world, and in that world, there is no gender. It's beyond. Nevertheless, in this occasion, he uses a gendered metaphor. If those of you who are a little familiar with Islamic tradition know that the Quran is in 114 chapters. 113 of them begin with the same verse. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's usually translated as, In the name of God, of everlasting mercy, infinite compassion. Everlasting mercy, infinite compassion. And these are the two qualities of God, the two names of God that we are introduced to again and again. Rahman and Rahim. Rahman and Rahim. And the Prophet says at one point something that the Muslim mystics pick up on. By the way, the same insight works in Hebrew, since Arabic and Hebrew are so closely related to one another. The Prophet says, remember that these two divine qualities, Rahman and Rahim, come from the root, Rahim, which is the womb of a pregnant mother. It is as if you and I and the entire cosmos is carried inside of God's womb. It is as if God is pregnant with you. So your relationship to God, the keeper of all the stars, is like the relationship of an unborn child being carried, loved, protected, nurtured inside the divine womb. We are knocking from the inside. We are the fish in the ocean. We are carried in God's eternal womb of compassion and mercy. Right? Such a different metaphor than the transcendent, unknowable King God. Many of these mystics keep reminding us that, if you would, vertical dimension of God as the Lord is always there. But then there's also a horizontal dimension, a face-to-face, heart-to-heart dimension. They use the language of the beloved to talk about God. One of them says, when I'm in public, I call you Lord. But at nights, when I'm whispering my intimate prayers to you, I call you beloved. I call you beloved. Another one of them says, when he's asked, what's this whole path of love thing about? What's your goal? And his answer is, ba khuda rahat budan. It's to be at ease with God. To be at ease with God. Another one is asked, how are you with God? And he says, friendship. God is my friend. And the language that they use to talk about this is almost sometimes childlike, in that state of sweet awe and wonder that sometimes children have. We were talking with Chris on the way over here about how children, until like the age of about 6 or so, they're really enchanted beings. They're not fully here. They still have one foot in some other realm. And that realm isn't the realm of fairies and princesses, it's the unseen realm. They carry the scent of heaven. Right? That's the reason we're told, out of the mouth of babes you shall hear truth. They're messengers of the unseen. So one of these, when he's asked, what is it like for you when you're talking with your beloved? And he says, I am with God as a toddler is in the lap of her mama. The feeling of safety, of love, of protection. This is how I am. Within the context of the Quran, there is a particular passage that comes. This is in chapter 5 of the Quran. God will bring forth a people. I'm going to use a gendered pronoun, even though, of course, God is beyond. He, you could easily say she. He, she loves them, and they love him, her. God will bring forth a people. They love him. He loves them, and they love him. Every mystical text worth its salt cites this verse. And here you have the calligraphy for that verse. And they say, exactly as you have in the New Testament, we couldn't even say that we love God unless we were loved first. Our response to God is naturally an extension of having been loved. But when the Sufis, these mischievous, playful, sweet, humorous mystics get their hands on this verse, they do some mystical hermeneutics. They play, because Scripture is the beloved's love letter to them. They love to play with the language. They don't put Scripture aside. They actually take pleasure in it. So here's what one of them says. This guy lives 1,100 years ago. What is love? If you're raised in the 80s, you would say, baby, don't hurt me. See? Thank you. Somebody appreciates the classics, you know? He was asked, what is love? He couldn't say, baby, don't hurt me. So he said, well, when I go to my dictionary, the word for love, hubb, in Arabic, in at least some dictionaries, is said to come from the word hubab, which is bubble. And you're like, you just lost me. What the hell does love have to do with bubbles? Hubb, hubab. So he says, my friend, I want you to go and take a pot or a kettle and put it on fire. Then stand over the water and watch it. Watch the water heat up. And at some point, if you look at the bottom of the kettle, the bottom of the pot, you will see little air pockets form. Those air pockets have always been there, but now they become visible, and you'll see them start to get agitated. You get to see them a little excited, and soon there's one air bubble over here and one air bubble over here, and the two of them start migrating towards each other. And they join. And how delicious it is when two bubbles link up together. But they don't stay there. Continue to heat up, they continue to get agitated and excited, and what eventually happens to that little air bubble? It rises, it moves, it ascends until it gets to the top of the water and it goes. The air that was in the water joins the air that's above the water. And they say, this is just like this for us. I see a friend. Can we be friends? Yes. What's your name? Your name? Bob and Hobab, Bob and Bubble Love, haven't seen each other for a while. I see Bob. I'm so excited to see my friend. I can't contain that love in my heart anymore. It demands to be expressed. So it rises through me and pops as a little glance, as a smile, maybe, hello, friend, as a little gentle touch. Love at some point can't be contained in your heart. It bubbles up inside you until it pops. It has to be manifest. And they say love is like this too. Sometimes this love demands expression and is expressed through your body. Love transforms all of you. If you claim to love someone, it has to change your eyes. It has to transform how you look at each other. It has to transform your tongue, how we speak with one another. It has to transform your ear, how we listen with one another. And it has to transform your touch. It is never a touch that clings or grabs or tries to possess. It is only a touch that brings comfort. Real love transforms your entire being. Your sight, your hearing, your smell, your words, your touch, your intimacy. It is all transformed. To love someone, we have to allow ourselves to be changed, to become a new being. But that kind of love, bubble love, kind love, is also how they talk about the sayings of the prophet that describe creation. There's a very famous saying of the Prophet Muhammad in which God says, I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be known. I loved for you to know me intimately, so your love bubbled up inside me. You are God's love bubble. You are the love that God couldn't contain or chose not to contain inside. Creation is the bursting of that love bubble. Creation is not a mistake. It is not an exile. It is not a sin. It's not a boo-boo. It is the intentional overflowing of God's love for you specifically. So this is an actual practice that these Muslim sages tell us to do. And the first time I did it, I started giggling, laughing, because it was so uncomfortable. I would like for you to try this tomorrow morning. Right now, you all are at your best. Everybody's showered, everybody's clean, got the dresses and the scarves and the ties. And I want you to get up tomorrow morning, go to the bathroom, and turn on the lights, and to look at yourself in the mirror and tell me what you see. Right? I think first time I tried this, I was like, honey, 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 you look like a piece of shit warmed over again. What if we were actually able to look in our reflection and say, you are a child of God, the love that couldn't be contained inside God's own heart. Did you know, we're all freaking out now because 2 days ago somebody had the first picture of the black hole. Did you know that your body is literally made up of the stuff of the universe? You are made up of stars. I'm not even talking about the spirit, the breath of God that is blown inside you. Your flesh and your body, you are cosmic stardust. Every single one of us. What would that be like? to say that to be on the path of love, cosmic stardust and the breath of the infinite, cosmic stardust and the spirit of love, cosmic stardust and divine manifestation. How would we treat one another? How would we speak with one another? A transformation. If that is the bubble love, that's not the only kind of love that these folks have. My goodness, I am so verbose. We're like 1/5 of the way through. No. No, we really are 1/5 of the way through. Around the year 1100, a mystic who lives about 150 years before the time of Rumi is asked to write a book on this concept of radical love. This is bubble love when it goes too far. Radical love becomes the most dominant theme in Muslim poetry. Every great Muslim love story is about radical love. And this guy, who's the one on the right, who's the leading Muslim scholar of the day, 200 years before there's an Oxford and a Cambridge, Muslims have their own universities, and he is the lead professor. And he says, I'll write you a book on radical love on one condition, and only one, that you never again make a distinction between the love of God and the love of humanity. Right? He would have made a great Bob Marley fan. There is one love. He says very clearly, love is not an emotion. Love is not a feeling. You don't get to do, today I love you, tomorrow I'm not feeling it. Love is the very unleashing of God onto this realm. The spilling over of God that creates you. It is this love that sustains you, that nourishes you. And if you can just get over yourself and merge with this love, then the same love is going to carry you back home. If you want to love God, you have to love humanity. Loving God is easy, he says. What has God ever done to you other than create you, love you, nourish you? One of my personal teachers was telling this story. He's like, yeah, I had someone come to me and say, I really love God, but it's just these damn annoying people that are pissing me off. And he said, I just said to them, my friend, who do you think created these annoying people? The same one that you claim to love. So here's a practice that they offer us. This is another one of these gems. So many of us are wounded. So many of us are traumatized. It's hard for us to love others because we have never fully embraced and accepted and loved ourselves. Many of us actually carry a deep kind of loathing for ourselves, for some of us, of our bodies, of our lived experiences. You have to love yourself, but you can't stop there. Love has to spill over. You have to project, as the great rabbis would say, you have to project the I into the thou. You have to get over your own damn self and love somebody else. The great mistake that we make is that we take all of love and we collapse it to one kind: physical, romantic, sexual love. Now, I just got married 7 months ago. If you can get that, and it's kosher, and it's halal, and it's legal, and it's signed and sealed, and go for it. Like, take pleasure in each other. But so many of us say, unloved. Maybe I'm even unlovable. And what we really mean is, I don't have that one romantic, physical, sexual one. Or I did, and I don't, for whatever reason. These sages tell you there's a whole rainbow of love, and beyond the rainbow, there's all those colors that we don't see. So they literally ask you, do you love your mama? Do you love your father? Was there someone who raised you who loved you? Did you love a teacher? Were you loved by a teacher? Do you love a sibling? Do you love a child? Do you love a friend? This is the one that you all are working on here. Do you love a neighbor? And that biblical and Quranic challenge, which we as a country are failing on, do you love a stranger? If you want to translate that word stranger into 21st century, do you love that refugee? Do you love that immigrant? That is not about being a Republican or a Democrat, blue state and red state. That's about right and wrong. Do you love the stranger? Remember that you yourselves were once strangers. One of these great mystics, the one on the left, I've been working on translating him. There's a guy who comes to him and says, I've tried it, didn't love my mama, didn't love my dad, didn't love my brother, didn't love my sister, didn't love a teacher, didn't love a friend, don't have a neighbor, don't love the stranger. And he's sort of stuck. And so he finally goes, do you remember being a child the first time that it would snow? And he's like, yeah. He's like, what did it feel like? He said, I would go out there and just watch the snowflakes twirling around and have them fall on me. And it's like, then you know love. Because at least you learn to love a snowflake. He says, maybe you can love a tree. Maybe you can love a river. Maybe you can love music. Maybe you can love solitude. Find out what it is that nourishes you. Find out what it is that gives you that sense of love. And make it a habit. Make it a practice. We have here a picture of arguably the greatest of the Muslim sages. This is the wonderful Rumi, who in the last few years has become probably the best-selling poet in America. People of all faith backgrounds turn to his poetry in translation. I'm going to read for you one passage in which Rumi talks about his experience of love. People in his age have dreams all the time, right? In our tradition, dreams are about wanting to do something terrible to your mother. In their tradition, dreams can be about God and the prophets and the sages, or love. Or love. So he starts out by describing for you what his experience of love has been like. I serve that moon-like beauty. Say nothing to me unless it's about her. Speak nothing of sorrow. Speak only words of this love treasure. Last night I became love-crazed. Love saw me and said, I've come. Don't shout. Say nothing. Then Rumi talks back to love. He's like, oh, love, it's you. I've experienced you before, and I got hurt real bad. I'm kind of afraid of getting hurt again. So this is what he says. I said, love, I'm afraid of something else. Love said, there is nothing else. Say nothing. Let me whisper secrets in your ear. Say nothing. And Rumi's like, so what are you? You are just the most beautiful being I've ever seen. I said, what a beauty. Are you an angel? Are you human? Love said, not an angel, not a human. Say nothing. So now Rumi just goes into like freak out mode. If you're not a human, and if you're not an angel, that leaves. I said, what is this? Say it. Love said, stay like this. Say nothing. Rumi says, I said, my heart, aren't you describing God? Love said, yes, my child, but hush, say nothing. Right? To have this experience of love is to have that most direct and powerful experience of beholding God. There's a wonderful story about him that I love. You all have the Tri-Faith Initiative here, which is a beautiful thing. Rumi lived in a city of Konya, which used to be a Greek Christian city of Iconium, the city of icons. So they're Jews, they're Christians, they're Muslims, they're Turks, Arabs, Persians, Greeks, Kurds, Armenians. Oh my. There's one character in there that I love because he's sort of a comic relief character. We've got about 800 pages of stories in Rumi's life. And every time this character, this Greek guy named Syrianus, comes up, it's always a good story. He loves Rumi so much that he wants to join his circle. And Rumi always said, look, anybody can come, anybody can listen to my stories, anybody can be a part of our circle. And at some point, if people were particularly attached, they might ask if they could take that next step and formally become Muslim, though it was not required. And so this Syrianus asks if he can also become Muslim, and Rumi says, yes, if this is what your heart desires. And he's given the name Ala-ed-Din, which is, we know it better as Aladdin. And he tries to learn Persian. Now, Persian was the refined language of the day, the poetic language of the day. It was the courtly, elegant language of the day. People on the street, they spoke Greek and Turkish. The sophisticated people, they spoke Persian. And so this man in his middle age is trying to learn a new language, and some of you may have had the experience of trying to learn a new language. Children pick it up really quickly. In our middle age, trying to learn a new language is really challenging. So this guy always goofs up, and his goofs are funny. So because this was an age of manners, of refinement, people had all these polite titles to refer to one another. One of Rumi's titles, for example, is Presence. Because when I'm with you, you remind me of the presence of God. Presence. In Victorian English, we had titles like Lord, Lord Shelley, Lord such and such, and then of course there is the Lord. Our friend Syrianus Aladdin keeps mixing up these two lords. So he always calls Rumi the Lord. He calls him God. And not everybody in Rumi's time was a sage. They had their fanatics, just like we do today. And so there's a group of fanatics who don't like Rumi to begin with, and surely don't like this guy who keeps calling Rumi God. So they drag him in front of a judge, and they're like, this heretic just called that man God. And the judge, who's kind of a more compassionate person, says, now, let's not do anything in haste. Let's find out what is in his heart. My child, my son, my friend, Rumi's an old man. Surely you don't mean to call him God, do you? And Syrianus Aladdin says, I always do this. This Persian is such a hard language. I always goof up. No. I didn't mean to call him God. And the judge is like, there, it is all settled. And the fanatics are like, man, we don't get to kill anybody today. Today sucks. And they're just about out the door, in which the judge, unfortunately, asks Syrianus one more question. My child, what did you mean to call him? And he's like, I did not mean to call him God. I wanted to call him God-maker. And so the fanatics turn right back around. Maybe we will get to crucify someone today. And the judge is like, son, I almost just saved your life. We decided that he wasn't God. And now you're telling me that you're wanting to call him God-maker. You're not helping. And Syrianus goes, I always goof up, always say the wrong thing. What I meant to say was that he makes God real to me. He makes God. He's a God maker because he makes God real for me. He says, until I met him, God was a word on a page. God was an idea in my head. When I saw his love, I knew that God had to be real. God became real. Love became real. Mercy became real. And there are people like this. How is your heart right now? Would you like to wrap up in 5 minutes or in 15 minutes? 15, okay. Gosh. I'll ask you again in 15 minutes now. So, when you go to Rumi's shrine, there's a sign that welcomes you, and this is that plaque. It says, "Come, come, whoever you are, come." If you are an infidel, a fire worshiper, or a heretic, come. This place is no place to be hopeless. If you have vowed and promised and repented 1,000 times, and 1,001 times you have failed, come again. It's one of the invitations that the path of love is not a path for the perfected. You don't have to have, as my kids in college would say, you don't have to have your shit together. You come precisely because you are broken. Bring your broken. Bring your hurt. Bring your pain. Bring your suffering. And they say, that's the one thing that the friend doesn't have. The friend doesn't have a brokenness. He will buy your brokenness. Give him, and if you feel like I have nothing to give him your nothingness. He buys your nothingness, and he will give you his everythingness. Here's Rumi's shrine in Turkey, and every year about 1.5 million people of all different faith backgrounds come for a pilgrimage. The structure is more or less as it has been since the 1300s. And this tradition that we're speaking of, this was not some little marginal, hidden in the corner, outlawed tradition. Next to the Quran, and only the Quran, erotic, mystical, sensual love poetry of Rumi and Hafiz were the texts most frequently copied by Muslims everywhere from Istanbul to Indonesia. Right? We're not in the business of making stereotypes, but in light of all the other stereotypes that today exist about Muslims, fine, if you want to stereotype us, go ahead. We're all a bunch of mystical poetry, sensual, erotic, wannabe lovers of God, right? At least that's what we have read. Before you could go to Amazon and order a book, every book had to be copied by hand. If you wanted to read a copy of Rumi's poetry, you had to pay somebody who would spend 6 months hand copying these 60,000 lines of erotic poetry. Right? There's a wonderful story about the difference between reading words on a page and walking this path of love from Rumi himself. When he's still a young mystic, he has a beautiful teacher, a wonderful friend on the path named Shams. And Rumi's sitting there reading a really difficult book of love poetry. And Shams comes up and goes, "What are you doing?" And Rumi, who's, kind of a little full of himself, he's a young, hot intellectual, he's like, I'm reading this very difficult text. Do you mind? And Shams is like, "What is it?" And Rumi's like, "You wouldn't understand." And Shams is like, "Okay." So he grabs the book out of his hand, runs over to a well, and tosses the manuscript down a well. Right? It's taken 6 months to get this manuscript. And Rumi's like, "What are you doing?" It's a story. Shams reaches down the well, brings the manuscript out of the water, hands it back to Rumi. Of course, it is unharmed. And he goes, "You wouldn't understand." Right? Now, these are stories, right? What do they tell you, these kind of stories? This is a tradition in which books are sacred. Writing is sacred. Paper is sacred. Ink is sacred. The pen is sacred. It's precisely because everything about books and learning is sacred that the story of tossing a book down a well, that scandalous act, makes it such a good story. And people in that age knew how to hear and tell a great story. It's not about, is it factually true? Is it a story that would stick with you in your heart? Here is where Rumi himself is buried. And there are pilgrims and seekers who come, as I said, from all over the world to be there. Some of you have heard of the phrase whirling dervish, right? That is, just as we have Benedictines and Franciscans and Jesuits, so this is the particular Sufi sisterhood and brotherhood that traces itself back to the teachings of Rumi. But the goal of the spiritual path is not to whirl. The goal of the path is to train your body so that you're aware of how you're moving through the world. The whirling is a training. Right? Most of you, most of us, if you just get up and whirl 10 times, you're going to look like some drunk sailor. You're going to be like tiptoeing back, and you're lucky if you can sit back down in your chair. These people whirl for 3 hours at a time. And when the teacher stamps his foot on the ground or snaps a picture, they come to a perfectly still stop because they've learned to be present inside their breath. And if you can do that when you're whirling, when the whole world around you is whirling, you can do it when you're with your friend Bob. When you watch them, they always have one foot, the left foot, on the ground, because that's the foot that is under your heart. It's the other foot that keeps whirling around you, to remind you that life is a balance between stillness and activity. We've lost that balance. Ours is a world of hyperactivity and no repose. If you also look at their hand gesture that they make, it is one that their right hand is turned up towards heaven and their left hand is turned down towards the earth. The image is one of dancing in rain. It's as if you're dancing in rain and you're catching rainfall with one hand and you're letting it flow through you, and then you're releasing it onto the earth. It is as if your being has become a channel of God's grace. But in order for the rain, mercy, life-giving force to flow through you, you got to empty out your inside. There is a blockage, and that blockage is our ego. We have work to do. That work is done through love. What does love do? Love says, it's not all about me, it's about you. If you're sitting here tonight, you've been loved. If you don't remember ever having loved someone, someone loved you. Someone got up with you in the middle of the night, again and again and again, when they had not had a solid night's sleep for 18 months. And they took you when you were crying, before you had words, and all you knew is that you needed whatever that life-giving liquid is. You have no words, so you do the one thing that you can, you cry, and someone comes to you, someone swoops you up, kisses you, hugs you, and they put that life force inside your mouth. And you know what that person, which for most of us is our mama, it might be a grandmother, it might be an aunt, it might be sometimes, I hope, a father. You know what that person didn't do when they heard you cry? They didn't make a cost-benefit analysis chart. Well, let's see here. This child has been crying now for 3 minutes. I, on the other hand, have not slept 8 hours for the last 18 months. And so I think simply my interests having equal weight and the same merit as this child's comfort would say that this child should cry for the next 4 hours while I sleep for... Right? You don't do that. Right? There is no sound more torturous than the sound of crying of your own child. Any child, but especially your child. You leap. It's not even rational. You move. And the love that gets your ass out of bed is redemptive, is divine. It's not about me, it's about you. So they say, these mystics say, okay, this love is saying it's not just about the ego, it's not about my comfort and my pleasure, it's about you. So many of us have learned to say, I will love my family. The rest of the world can go to hell in a handbasket. Right? Congratulations. You've evolved beyond the ego, and you've reached the rank of nepotism. Wonderful job. But you still got work to do. You love your baby, and guess what? Everybody else loved their baby. I know what I would want for my babies. I've been to 40 plus countries around the world. People disagree about politics, language, food, religion, theology. The one thing I know is everybody wants the best for their babies. I want food in my babies' tummies. I want a roof over their head. I want dignity in their bones. And other people want the same thing for their babies. I would never want to have my children deprived. And don't I dare be silent when someone else has a child who is without. If you wouldn't want to have your child put in a cage, don't you dare be silent when somebody else's baby is put in a cage. That has nothing to do with being a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim. That's a call of love, right? Rabbi Heschel, the most prophetic voice of Judaism in the 20th century, says, the prophet, who is really love in action, the prophet comes like a scream in the middle of the night because his heart is so attuned to the suffering of the people that he cannot dare remain silent. That's the prophet. People who love so much, too much, to remain silent. And you know that unless you do something, the rocks are going to cry out. So you rise above nepotism. And you say, okay, well, all of our community has to have food and shelter and dignity. Mazel tov. You've risen above nepotism, and you've reached the rank of provincialism. No, you got to let love spill over some more. And some people will say, okay, yeah, I think I can do that. I will love everybody inside the imaginary boundaries of our nation. We'll take care of everybody in the nation. The rest of the world can go to hell in a handbasket. I even heard one leader say recently, the country is full. Somewhere we read that there was a virgin and a child who were also told that the inn was full. If you've done that, then congratulations. You've risen above being provincial, and you're just now a nationalist. Some people will say, okay, you're right, I'll be bigger than a nationalist. I love everybody who looks like me. Mabruk. Congratulations. You've risen above being a nationalist, and you're now a racist. Some people will say, okay, no, I'll do better than that. I will love everybody who bows down in prayer as I do. The rest of the world can go in heaven. Congratulations. You've loved beyond being a racist. You're now a religious bigot. No, love has to keep spilling over until every single soul is washed over. There's not a blade of grass that is left unwashed in love. Every child, every soul has the breath of God in them. That's the way that the path of love speaks to us today. This is what my own teachers from the Muslim tradition taught me. This is also what, when I have sat at the feet of the people who were close to Dr. King, from the black prophetic Christian tradition, have taught me. I was asked this last Thursday, exactly a week ago, to go to Memphis and stand on the balcony where Dr. King was shot and killed. Right? I've had the great honor of being loved and mentored by the people who were part of his movement and his closest friends. And how extraordinary that the teachings about love that come out of the mouths of these 85 and 90-year-old black men are exactly the same teachings about love that come out of the heart and the mouth of my own Muslim teachers. And this is what they leave us with, and I'm going to wrap up with your permission. They say, there is one love, that love of God connected to the love of humanity. When this love comes out into the public, we call it justice. That's what justice is. It's public love. It is, I know how much I love my babies. I would give my own life for them. And I know that they love their babies just as much. I would never do to their babies what I wouldn't want to have happen to my babies. And don't I dare be silent when something is happening to their babies. Justice is that work of love out in public. But then, that spirit of love, when it moves out, we're going to call it justice, it can also move inward, inside you, and we're going to call that tenderness. Tenderness is in short supply in our world today. Even many of us who think that we are working for the cause of justice think that in order to do it, we've got to be tough. We've got to be fierce. We've got to be uncompromising. We've got to steamroll the people who stand in our way. This is where the path of love teachers challenge us. When Dr. King was working with some of my teachers in having black folk have the right to get on Montgomery buses, and they had to organize a boycott, and the case goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules in their favor. In 1956, Martin says, this task of love leads us not to seek to defeat white men, but to win them over in friendship. The goal is not to humiliate them and to crush them. The goal is to realize that we are in this together. Either we go up together or we come down together, but we're in this together. Our fates, my friends, are wrapped up in one another. We're not going to win by crushing the opposition. We share this tiny little planet. Now, some of our fellow planet friends are quite unlikable these days. Or at least they behave in quite unlikable ways. Martin told us, and the Sufis tell us, thank God that we were not told that this is a path of radical like. I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like how they treat me. I do not like what they call me. But I'm still compelled to love them and to realize that our fates are bound up together. I actually wish for them to be liberated from the fear and the animosity and the dread that they're living in. And when that path moves inward, tenderness. Yes, we have to be firm in defending those who are hungry, who are poor, who are locked up in cages. And in dealing with people, we're also going to be tender. We cannot out-tweet our way out of this nightmare. We cannot out-bluster our way. We will not out-shout our way. And the response to people who want to talk about making America great again, for us will start by saying, how about we start by trying to make America kind, good, just. Perhaps it has never been for many of us. But we cannot defeat the darkness by bringing more darkness into it. We have to become voices of light. I think I'm going to end with just, there really was like a lot more to go through, but that happens from time to time. I'm going to end with just a simple invitation. What you all are doing here in Omaha, I honestly, truly have not seen before. I've been to most states in the country, to about 40 plus countries around the world. I've never seen this. I've seen places like Lebanon, where there's a mosque, a church, and a synagogue in one street corner. But I've never seen people who are like, we got ourselves a beautiful church here, we're going to pack it all up and move 6 minutes or 10 minutes down the road. And our Muslim friends are going to pack up and move right here, and our Jewish friends are going to move right here, and we're going to have like a circle where we can just be neighbors. This is extraordinary. This is the kind of forming of the beloved community that is really hard to do in a New York City. It's not just the city that's bigger, the egos are bigger. You can do this in Omaha. You can actually get to know one another as people. And that's going to mean having conversations, listening to and with one another, not just learning about the other, not just learning from the other, learning with. Learning with. It's going to mean face-to-face, heart-to-heart. It's going to mean eating together. I tell you, I have this simple litmus test. And if having your daughter date someone of the other community is like too high of a bar right now, having them come to your home, that's a revolutionary act. For somebody who is unapologetically brown, this is where I know whether someone genuinely loves me. If you've invited me to your home, it's really hard for you to hate me because I'm so lovable. I've known that I'm lovable since before I read scripture. My mama loved me since before I had language. I have no confusion about my absolute worthiness of love. And why should you live deprived of my lovability? Seriously. Like this package, this cosmic stardust is adorable, and so are you, right? Learning with, growing with, eating with. The beloved community is bigger than any one of our faith traditions. The invitation that I would just extend to you, and I'm going to stop talking here, is this world is one of extraordinary heartache and suffering, which readily we put on the front pages of newspapers and all of the headlines. Acts of beauty, of kindness, of gentleness, of love, of service tend to go quietly, underreported, if not unreported. When 9/11 happened, right, extraordinary suffering, 19 members of the university that I worked at were killed. Parents of my own students perished in those towers. So I had to think about, what do I have to say that in some small way might make us each ambassadors of goodwill? So a program, there's many different programs. There's no one size fits all. There's no one key solution. But one thing that I decided was, what about if we take people from this part of the world and we go to that part of the world and we go to places where there have been Muslims and Jews and Christians living together mostly in peace. Not always, because they're human, but certainly for most of their history, much better than they have almost anywhere else. So for about 17 years, I've been taking Jews and Christians and Muslims and atheists and agnostics, oh my, right? I don't care what your faith background is. I don't ask. I don't need to know. I just want to know, are we willing to walk together? And we've now had over 700 people from 15 different countries who come. Recently we added Morocco. The basic site is in Turkey. We still go twice a year. One time we go to Turkey, one time we go to Morocco. And it's a transformative experience for me, as it is for them. I met my wife on one of these trips, so it has changed my whole life. My children have come on this trip, and I extend an invitation for those of you who are interested. And if you haven't traveled very far internationally before, or if you've gone, but you want to maybe go deeper, this might be an opportunity to do that. Regardless of what you do, I just want to affirm again that what you're doing here is important. It's unprecedented. It's beautiful. I am astonished by the level of discernment and care that has gone into this. The beloved community doesn't descend down upon you from heaven. You have to make the beloved community here and now. In your Tri-Faith initiative, you have all the tools that you need. You have the infrastructure, you've got the leadership, and you have the community. And I know that you have the love. Let it shine. May it shine. May it be beautiful. May it be lovely. May it be transformative. And at a time where it feels like the world is overrun with a little too much darkness, may this be a beautiful beacon of healing and of light and love that you shine for the rest of the world. Thank you for letting me be your guest. Thank you for letting me talk way too long past my time, and I'm grateful and honored to have been with you.
I know there are probably a ton of questions and things, but because it's so late in the hour, I would suggest that maybe you write those questions down and send them to Dr. Safi at Duke University, and he'll probably write you back. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, he also is going to be available to sign books outside, so we'll ask that you let him exit first so he can get all set up for that, but before you go, a gift. Thank you so much for being with us.